And we are live. Welcome in, everybody, to a brand new, fresh live episode of Dove Valley Deep Divers. I know I'm here on this pod, and you're going, what the heck's going on? Is this Huddle Up podcast? No, this is the Dove Valley Deep Divers. I'm making a rare one-time appearance on this podcast to just kind of shepherd the dudes here, Erick Trickel and Lance Sanderson, on how to use our streaming service, work them into this process. But now that we are knee-deep in NFL draft coverage, it's time to start really breaking down prospects and rolling up our sleeves. You guys are going to be seeing a lot more of Erick and Lance and also Nick and Carl down the road, but they're going to be coming to you live and trying to take as much of their podcast coverage live. And this is us kind of scratching the surface and getting started. Let me go around the horn really quick. Erick, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, man. Excited to be doing this. I was very excited to join a couple weeks ago and just excited to do it again.
Lance, my dog, how are you, brother?
Not bad, man. Just in the middle of getting stuff moved around, getting Samantha and the boys moved in and whatnot. It's been kind of an interesting process over the last week or so. And, just to be able to jump on and do this. And it was kind of a last minute deal for me. But at the same time, I'm really excited to jump on and get on with you guys live.
It's going to be fun. And guys, we have a couple of topics that we want to kind of touch on here to get this conversation rolling. But just as always, you guys are our live viewers are as much a part of this conversation as we are. And so as we get going, put your questions in the comment stream. We'll get you involved. We'll address anything that's on your mind. We're going to talk a little bit about the Shrine Game. Of course, it's going on right now. Some of the prospects who have emerged over this last week. Next week is the beginning of the Senior Bowl week, which is a fun, exciting time. Of course, the game won't be played till next Saturday, a week from today. But really, the Senior Bowl is all about the week of practice. That's where the one time I covered it on site, that's what surprised me. Everyone flew in to be there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then they flew out Friday morning. I'm like, why is everyone bailing? The freaking game's not till Saturday. And everyone's like, no, media, we don't care. We just want to see what happens during practice, which was a complete culture shock to me. So that's coming next week. But first thing I wanted to get to, guys, and a topic is the Shrine Game, and we're going to grab that in just 1 second. First, I just want a quick matter of business to everybody. Make sure you are following these dudes on Twitter. You can see right here, Lance Sanderson, at Sanderson MHH, Erick Trickel, who is the lead draft analyst for milehighhuddle.com, at Erick Trickel. Don't forget, it's a CK on Erick there. And, of course, the main podcast account, at Huddle Up Pod. You can see where to find me. You guys know how to find me. So, and then also take some time. If you haven't done this, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a creative review under the Huddle Up podcast. Both Dove Valley Deep Divers and Building the Broncos fall under Huddle Up podcast on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. So if you get some time, head on over, tell us what you think of the shows. We really appreciate your insight, and it's a great organic way for you to support the show. All right, Erick, I know you've been doing an ungodly amount of work on this 2020 draft class. It's the Shrine Games going on today, and I think it's halftime as we went live. Who are some of the guys, as it relates specifically to Bronco needs, Bronco fits, who are some of the guys who have emerged over this last week of practice and, of course, whatever's happened in this first half of the game?
Well, there's two guys on the interior offensive line that I really want to talk about. First and foremost, that's Darrell Williams, a center out of Mississippi State. His first half was actually really good. He showed off his power, he showed off his smarts, and he showed off improved technique and mobility. That was the big concern coming into the Shrine Week for just not the Broncos, but every team. They wanted to see that more from him, and he was showcasing that. And then one of my biggest draft crushes is Michael Onwenu out of Michigan. He's a big guard, 360 pounds, 6'4", I think is what he ended up being in height, and huge dude, but he moves like a smaller guy, very nimble, very mobile, and he's got plenty of power to just drive defenders back off the ball. And there was one touchdown run by his team in the game today in the first half where he was pushing the linebacker or the defensive lineman, I can't remember which, about 10 yards downfield and got the running back into the end zone for the touchdown, just paving the way for him. Big guy, absolutely love him for the Broncos because if they want to run inside like Pat Shurmur wants to do, this guy can open up lanes, but he's also got the mobility to still run the outside zone kind of stuff.
Nice.
On the defensive side of the ball, there's a guy from Utah, John Pennicini, I think is his name. Mm-hmm. I might be mistaken on that. But he's been wreaking havoc all week long. He's been one of the better defensive linemen out there, but he's been pretty consistently been viewed as the third best, which is speaking to the strength of how good how good this defensive line group was. Khalil Davis out of Nebraska and Bravion Roy out of Baylor. Those two were just completely dominant. Offensive linemen had trouble stopping them. Basically, every single rep they were winning. The one concern with Khalil Davis, though, is that he did show up and they switched from a 4-3 the first day to a 3-4 the second day. And when he was playing as a 5-tech in the 3-4 front, he was really struggling. His best spot was as a 3-tech in a 4-3 front. So that's something to be concerning about too. And I'm a big trenches guy, so a lot of my focus was over the first half of the game, and the practices was focusing on these guys. And those are just some guys that really stood out so far.
If I'm not mistaken, Philip Lindsay, who we all know didn't get an invite even to the combine, went undrafted, didn't appear in the Senior Bowl either, but he did participate in Shrine Week, if I'm remembering right.
Mm-hmm. I believe he did, yeah.
So you never know. My point being, though, is that some of these guys, they're usually Shrine Game prospects are kind of viewed a little bit more as day 3 caliber guys, NFL caliber prospects, but probably going to land somewhere more around day 3, whereas Senior Bowl, I mean, you can have like Baker Mayfield, the number 1 overall pick, playing in the Senior Bowl all the way through guys, that end up getting drafted day 2, day 3, and some that slip through and end up in the NFL as college free agents. Lance, I'm not sure if you've had much time to scout the Shrine Game, but with the Senior Bowl coming up here, we're going to get to some questions. We got a super chat coming in from one of our great superstars on Super Chat here in just a second. But do you have any guys you're keeping an eye on heading into Senior Bowl week?
Yeah, one specifically, I live in Wyoming, and a guy that I've been really kind of pounding the table for, I see Eric over here laughing, but the guy that I'm really kind of pounding the table for, because I think he's just a really good scheme fit for what Vic Fangio wants to do with the defensive side of the football, is Logan Wilson, the linebacker out of Wyoming. Not a great athlete. He's not really going to be that sideline to sideline guy that could, chase plays from the backside and everything like that. But he's extremely intelligent, extremely smart, high football IQ kind of guy, puts himself in the right position. I mean, he's a tackling machine, has over 400 career tackles at the University of Wyoming, and is also good enough to be able to drop back into, some of the intermediate zones and play as a coverage linebacker. One thing that is a big aspect of scheme is that ability to drop back into the zones. He does have 10 career interceptions over his 4-year career as a University of Wyoming Cowboy.
Okay. All right. Eric, what's your thoughts on Lance's boy there for the Cowboys?
Well, we actually talked about him on the podcast. It's going to be coming up a little bit later this weekend.
Okay, gotcha.
But just real quick, I actually really like his game. He's definitely rising up my board, but his tape is just a little bit boring to watch. Very good player, but not overly exciting.
Okay, guys, let's start grabbing some questions here. Steven Baumgartner jumps in with a $5 super chat. Thank you, brother. We appreciate you. He says, hey, guys, would you want CeeDee Lamb or Henry Ruggs? And I'll take it around the horn, starting with you, Eric. Who would you prefer of those two prospects coming to Denver?
I would definitely take CeeDee Lamb over Henry Ruggs. I think that the Pat Shurmur scheme is going to focus more on after the catch than speed downfield, although they will have shots, and I think Lamb offers more upside as an after the catch guy than Henry Ruggs does. Plus, he's my number 1 receiver in the class. I think that Lamb is absolutely fantastic.
Who's his NFL comp?
He is a mixture of Dustin Hopkins and another guy that you asked me this last time I still can't remember who the other guy was.
Dude,
and I forgot to look at my notes, but he's very similar to Nuck Hopkins, yeah.
Okay. All right, let's what's your answer there? CeeDee Lamb, Lance, or would you prefer the burner in Ruggs?
If it was still with Rich Scangarello in the offense, a threat that could take the top off of the defense like Henry Ruggs, that would be probably the guy that I would lean more towards for the Broncos at number 15 overall. But if CeeDee Lamb is still available for the Broncos at 15, he has to be the pick. I mean, he's a scheme transcendent, a quarterback transcendent kind of caliber player that can, as Eric said, he can take the top off the defense. He's not necessarily a super huge burner, but he is a very good player after the catch, runs really good routes, has really good hands, and it would be just a perfect compliment to Cortland Sutton.
Nick jumps in with a question here. He says, I am one that believes going receiver in round 1 ends up bad more times than not. Could we go grab a burner receiver in free agency? If so, who? Now, guys, obviously not exactly a draft-related question. I don't know how much either of you have done on the free agent class coming up here in the NFL, but do you see anyone in this class, Eric, that might fit that burner role that you could see the Broncos maybe throwing a few clams at?
There are definitely some, but the biggest one is Robbie Anderson of the New York Jets. And he's a guy that recently came out, and well, not so recently, it was actually towards the beginning of the season, and said that he isn't going to go give the New York Jets any kind of hometown discount. He wants money. He wants to get paid. And he's probably going to be looking at a decent contract from the NFL just because the speed that he brings. But there's some concerns with his attitude, and I'm not sure if Denver will want to deal with that, especially after just getting away from Emmanuel Sanders and his kind of attitude concerns that he brought.
Lance, my concern with a guy like Robbie Anderson, Cody bringing it up here as well, is simply how much of it's having that vertical speed and the threat to take the top off a defense. It is valuable. There is a value inherent in that. However, it comes down to financially, what is that worth? And if this is a guy that thinks he's, going to be trying to max out a contract in this free agent period for himself, which, who knows? You never know what some teams are willing to throw a really fast wide receiver dollars wise. Do you see Robbie Anderson being worthy, considering what the Broncos' needs are, considering they're going to this Pat Shurmur offense? Would that add up value-wise to throw money at a guy like Anderson?
With the Broncos having as much money as they have, I could see him maybe offering, $10, $12 million a year. But if it's going to be any more than that, they need to look in a different direction. I mean, with Anderson, he really is kind of that one-trick pony, that deep burner athlete, the guy that can take the top off of the defense. But he doesn't really have, and yes, he does offer just a little bit going across the middle of the field just because he is so fast. But he's not a great route runner. He's not a technician. And I just don't think that Denver needs to go in that direction, even if it was Rich Scangarello as the offensive coordinator. Just too rich for my blood, especially in this deep wide receiver class.
All right, we've got Dylan jumping in with a $10 super chat. We appreciate you, Dylan. Thank you very much. He says, happy to see Eric and Lance on the pod. Who are some sleeper wide receiver prospects? Eric, this is right up your alley. Drop some knowledge for Dylan here.
Well, there's Omar Bayless out of Arkansas State. He's going to be playing in the Collegiate Bowl a little bit later today. He's a guy who had just a tremendous season for Arkansas State, catching balls all over the place, has good speed, has good catch radius, has a little bit of everything to him, good route runner as well. So he's one guy that's definitely worth keeping an eye on. Freddie Swain and Josh Hammond, they've both been having a really good Shrine Week, and they're just definitely showing up and showing that they can definitely be huge parts of an offense. Jamarcus Bradley from Louisiana Lafayette. Then you've got Benjamin Victor from Ohio State. He has absolutely killed it this weekend for the Shrine game, or Shrine Bowl as it's now called. John Hightower, he's a speedster from Boise State. He's at the Shrine Bowl today, and he's definitely has that speed to really take a top off defense, and he's got some really good change of direction ability as well. Keith Gavin out of Florida State. He's another guy who has good speed downfield. There's a lot of guys. This is such a strong receiver class, and this is, in my opinion, the best receiver class that we have ever had. So there's a lot of guys. I definitely think that just any of these guys can go in and help any kind of offense from right away, depending on what their role is.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire. We've gotten a lot of questions about him. I know he's a guy you've recently done a lot of work on, Eric. Your thoughts? Well, let me start with Lance. I'm sure everyone watched the Natty, right? Everyone stayed up and watched that phenomenal college football championship game in which LSU emerged victorious over Clemson, handing them who was it? The quarterback, that young quarterback, his first loss as a college player. Everyone got to see what Clyde Edwards-Helaire is able to do. I'm wondering about what his value is, like where you guys see him falling in the draft. Lance, I'll start with you.
Now, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I do thoroughly enjoy his game. He's an outstanding runner between the tackles, has very good vision, is a great receiver out of the backfield. But one of the things that he brings to the game is just his ability as a blocker, in pass protection. He's a true dynamic 3-down running back, and just with Devontae Booker on his way out, Eric and I kind of talked about him, about Edwards-Helaire on the podcast coming up this weekend. Just with Devontae Booker being able to, or leaving in free agency, that opens up a big need for the Broncos. It's actually kind of a sneaky need. And I don't necessarily think that they're going to go out. And obviously we just saw that Travis Etienne decided that he's going to return back to Clemson to go back for his senior season. So that takes, a player like that out of the second round. But as far as getting like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, mid third round, early fourth round, something like that, somewhere late day 2, early day 3, that would be a really good pick for the Broncos, especially with the need that they have in getting a true 3-down running back.
What do you say, Eric?
Well, if he was there in that mid-late third round, fourth round, and Denver passed on him, I may end up getting arrested for breaking into Dove Valley and causing problems. I think this is a guy who's definitely looking at going in the second round. I mean, he's got the ability to run between the tackles with power and toughness. He's got the speed and the vision and the ability to make quick cuts to run outside in those outside zones that Pat Shurmur absolutely loves to run. Huge part of his offense. He's got the receiving ability, which is another key point for Pat Shurmur in this offense. If you want to be a running back, you've got to be able to catch. And he's also a very good blocker. I mean, that's, if anything, that the blocking ability is his weakest area. Very good third down skill set, can do it all for you. Brings in so much to an offense that I think that teams, the value's not there for running backs in that first round, but we're seeing the value for them really start in the second round, and that's where I think that he goes.
If Etienne ends up declaring, where would you have seen him go in the draft? What would your projection be?
I think he would have gone in the second round. I don't think that he offers as much power as Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but his ability in space even as a receiver, even though that he did come out and say that he's not comfortable as a receiver, he definitely answered some concerns there this last season. And his ability in space, the speed, the vision, the cutback ability, and a team that runs its own scheme like San Francisco, I think that they would have absolutely loved to swallow him up in that second round.
I don't understand. Whoever was advising that kid, I mean, if you're a near lock to be a second-round pick and you're a running back, you got to strike while that iron's hot, dude. Instead of going back and risking a senior season, putting more tread or, taking more tread off your tires and wear and tear. And I don't know who was advising him, but, the coach down there probably should have said, no, I know you want to come back, but you need to go make some money, my son. Now, Josh jumps in. He says, what are some realistic trade scenarios you think could happen? I guess let's just keep it with first round. Eric, what could you see possibly happening? The Broncos sitting almost smack dab in the middle of round one with the 15th pick.
I think that if they do make a trade in the first round, I think it would be more likely for them to trade down than to trade up. The simple fact is that the Broncos, they have a high value on picks that they, especially the last few years, where they're wanting to take more of that scattershot approach, have more selections to try and hit bigger on some of these picks. And trading up, especially if you want to get to 10, you're giving up one of those third-round picks, possibly a fourth-round pick as well. Denver has 5 picks in the first round. I think that they want to maximize those. So moving down seems a little bit more likely than moving up.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just quickly, it all really does. This is a big cliche with people in the draft community, is it just really kind of depends on how the board falls. But at the same time, if say a guy like Tristan Wirfs is there or John Elway falls in love with CeeDee Lamb and he falls down to, 8, 9, 10, somewhere around in that area, where the Broncos could go and say, we've got 3 third-round picks. We can go with a first and a third and maybe a future like fourth or something like that, and jump up a few places to be able to go and get, a premier offensive tackle that can fill in. And it's really kind of a tricky situation right now. But with the growth that we did see with Garrett Bowles over the last, quarter of the season, I saw on the Pro Football Focus Denver Broncos Twitter handle the other day that Garrett Bowles was rated as the second highest offensive tackle in the NFL from weeks 14 through 17. So it was an 88.8 overall grade. Now, there's obviously questions with Bowles as far as the holding penalties and, just the inefficiencies that he's had as a left tackle. But you did see a big step in the right direction with him under Mike Munchak this year. And it might not be necessarily that the Broncos need to go and get an offensive tackle to fill in for Garrett Bowles. We might be talking on the other side of the offensive line and taking care of Juwan James with his injury history. He played less than 100 snaps this year. So getting a depth guy, I probably wouldn't like to do that as far as in the first round. But I mean, if they do fall in love with someone like Tristan Wirfs or Jedrick Wills is there, someone like that, it wouldn't surprise me to see John Elway maybe make a move up and try to at least go fortify the offensive line just a little bit further for Drew Lock.
Josh jumps in with a $2 super chat donation. We thank you. Appreciate that, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
Means a ton. It says, what do you think of Antonio Gandy-Golden? Now, guys, I'll be the first to admit, I don't know who this dude is. Eric, do you know Antonio Gandy-Golden?
He's a wide receiver out of Liberty. He's got good size. I think he's like 6'4", and he's right around that 220-pound range. I believe. I might be mistaken on his weight a little bit, but I know he's right out there around 6'4". He runs actually pretty good routes for it. Doesn't offer a lot of speed down the field, but his routes, his hand strength, and just his ability to get quick separation for quick catches is something that's going to be very enticing for NFL teams. Somewhat similar to Cortland Sutton in the size and skill set aspect of things.
Ben jumps in really quick, guys. He says, does Tristan Wirfs fit in Shermer's new power scheme? I just want to question the premise, though, that it's going to be Shermer's power scheme, because from what I've gathered, asking around and just kind of seeing the way Shermer's gone with his offenses in the past, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, maybe I'm wrong on this, but it seems to me that if you're Pat Shermer, you're coming in, you're probably, when you have an offensive line coach like Mike Munchak, aren't you just basically saying, Mike, you tell me what kind of blocking philosophy you want to employ here and just let him do his thing?
Yes, that is something that Pat Shermer really likes to do, but two staples of his offensive scheme are zone runs. He really loves to run the outside zone, letting the running backs read the defense and make that cut forward. That is something that he's carried with him to every single stop along the way. And in fact, with the New York Giants, I saw one of the New York Giants reporters, I can't remember who it was, tweet this out, that about 87% of the runs on offense were zone plays. And this fits in with what they did with the Minnesota Vikings, what he did with the Cleveland Browns, what he did with the St. Louis Rams. He is very much a zone scheme guy, but he does throw in some power and gap concepts into his offense as well. But he also tends to try and go with what the offensive line, what they're able to do, and what the offensive line coach would prefer them to do. So it's definitely some versatility there with his scheme. But I think that with the Broncos, he's definitely going to lean more on Mike Munchak with that. And I think that overall, they just kind of want to stick with more zone stuff.
So you tell me, Lance, would Wirfs fit in power, or is he more of a, zone blocking, lateral moving type of offensive tackle?
Well, one thing that I like to tell all my friends that ask me multiple choice questions is that the correct answer to any multiple choice question is yes, because Tristan Wirfs is actually he's a scheme versatile player. He's a position versatile player. Now, like I said earlier, maybe taking him to be your starting left tackle with Garrett Bowles in the way that he's developed, I don't know if that's necessarily the right move as of for right now, but there is a big hole right now at the right guard position, and Tristan Wirfs would be able to fill into that right guard position for the Denver Broncos at ease. I think that he would be able to do that starting day one, and it would be a great interior offensive line if the Broncos could get, Connor McGovern to come back in free agency this year. You've got Dalton Reisner, Tristan Wirfs on either side of him, and then work your way on the outside there. And if nothing else, then you have Tristan Wirfs, who is able to play 4 out of the 5 offensive line positions at a high level. He can slide outside to the right tackle position, say Juwan James goes down with another injury, and then we would be able to see Elijah Wilkinson step into that right guard position where he has played not necessarily significantly better, but he has played better as the right guard and the guard position. He's just not athletic enough to be that tackle. So worse if at 15, or even like I said just a few minutes ago, maybe trading up to go get him. It's really kind of what more of your preference do you want, but at the same time, he would fit in Pat Shermer's offense very well.
Yeah, and just to quickly add to that about Tristan Wirfs is he played a lot of right tackle at Iowa. I mean, he did move over to left tackle when Erick Jackson did get hurt. But there is a big thing among offensive linemen about switching from tackle to guard, and that it's easier for them to switch from tackle to guard on the right side than it is for them to go from left tackle to right tackle or vice versa. So with Tristan Wirfs, that is something to keep an eye on. And there has been a lot of talks from people from my contacts and stuff like that are in the NFL that are talking that maybe for a year or two, Tristan Wirfs would be better benefited by playing right guard before being just thrown into at left tackle right away.
Flippant Booch has a more general Broncos question here. He says, with the Broncos having 3 head coaches on their roster, and what he means, you got Vic Fangio, Mike Munchak, former head coach of the Tennessee Titans, and now Pat Shermer, who's a 2-time NFL head coach. With 3 head coaches on the roster, something that no other NFL team currently has, do you guys believe the Broncos will finally return to their winning ways? It's still quite early here, fellas, with the Broncos still have to attack this offseason and spend their free agent dollars wisely and utilize what are expected to be 12 draft picks wisely. But overall, what do you see? I'll start with you, Eric. What do you see for this team in 2020, knowing the coaching staff, knowing the momentum that the youth of this roster took into the offseason?
Well, for me, I mean, obviously it's going to depend on what they do in free agency and the draft, as you said, Chad. But the biggest thing is I am expecting, because of this, they're really putting a focus on returning to being a winning franchise and competing for a playoff spot. If they don't end the season with at least a 9-7 record, this season would be a disappointment for me. Of course, that will change after the draft and free agency, because those are such big key components for building the roster that still has a lot of holes. This roster isn't as good, in my opinion, as many others. So big changes are to be expected for them, but that is what I'm expecting right now.
What do you say, Lance?
I agree with Eric on this one, and just going back to the last 5 games of this season and seeing how the Broncos played with Drew Lock in the fold, and the execution was a little bit better. Rich Scangarello took a few steps forward, and now we're going to see a more experienced and high level play caller and Pat Shurmur come in and start to guide this offense. I think that just the growth of the young weapons with Phillip Lindsay, Cortland Sutton, obviously Noah Fant, and we'll see what happens with the draft. And I imagine that the Broncos are probably going to get at least 1, if not even 2 wide receivers in this class this year. I mean, with the young weapons and the explosive dynamic that this offense could potentially have under Pat Shurmur, it would be a really disappointing thing to see the Broncos go down and not at least finish with a 500 record. I might not say 9-7, but still at the same time, this team was a lot closer than a lot of people gave them credit for. We did see the Broncos lose 3 games by last-minute game-winning field goals in the fourth quarter where the defense couldn't hold, stupid penalties, the roughing the passer call on Bradley Chubb, stuff like that. And then they did blow a 20-point lead in Minnesota. So there's 4 games right there that the Broncos could have and should have won. Now, with the Broncos finishing, 6-10, you flip those 4 games, 10-6, they're in the playoffs.
7-9.
7-9, excuse me. So regardless, but so
that's a playoff record.
That's a playoff record. That's a playoff record, and with the Broncos and the growth that this team could potentially have, it's not hard to see them return to the playoff conversation and at least really pound on the door for coming back in the AFC West.
That's a great point, dude. I mean, they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory 4 times last year, and you got to wonder. None of those, of course, came under the purview of Drew Lock at quarterback. They all preceded him. You got to wonder how they might have shaken out differently had he been the quarterback. Now, Black Knight jumps in with a $5 donation on Super Chat. He says, and by the way, thanks, Black Knight. We appreciate you, brother. He says,
thanks,
if Brandon Scherf is out of the price range for the Broncos, who are some free agent guards that can help? Eric, I know there's one guy in particular you've talked a lot about at milehighhuddle.com that hails from New England.
Yeah, Joe Thuney out of the New England Patriots. I mean, he's a fantastic left guard. He was one of the best guards in the NFL this last year. And he can move. He's got decent power, although power is not his strongest suit. I definitely like him in Pat Shurmur's scheme. I think that he's a guy that's going to be looking for big money. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting more than Brandon Scherf, though. And outside of him, the guard class in free agency is a little bit on the weaker side, for the simple fact that there are guys who are starters get set to hit the open market, but they're going to hit the open market because they just weren't good this last year. Maybe a guy like Quentin Spain out of Buffalo, he was really bad this last year, but maybe a change of scenery again could benefit him. But we'll see. I mean, I'm just not certain that Quentin Spain is really a guy who can be a starter for the Broncos.
Buana Beast has a really good question here to kind of illuminate this subject for Broncos country. He says, hey guys, can you tell me more about what the defensive tackle is needed for the Broncos defense? What traits does Fangio like, and who are some potential players? So for the Fangio defense, the nose tackle, the defensive tackle, what's your answer, Eric?
Well, you're looking for a guy that can be a 5-tech in their base 3-4 front, and then a guy who can sub down and play that 3-tech in their sub packaging that they often run under Vic Fangio. He's got to have good length. He's got to be able to keep the offensive linemen's bodies off of him. So you're looking for a guy with a little bit longer arms, and then you're looking for a guy who can definitely just has the power to just throw those guys off to the side and shoot the gap. But you also want a guy who can be athletic enough to just shoot the gap right off the snap. So there's definitely it's a little bit harder to find these guys right away that can fill them in. This is why Bill Kohler is going to be so critical in the development of these defensive linemen. But you just want an athletic guy who can shoot gaps, but you also want him to have plenty of power. Technique and all that can come later. That can come with coaching. But just the raw traits of a tackle, you can't coach those up. That's what Big Fangio likes to look for first.
Lance, it sounds like, in other words, those, you got peaks and valleys in every player's performance. As it pertained to Mike Purcell, when you saw him in his peak, that's kind of the model that Fangio looks for. The problem with Purcell was too many peaks and valleys, not consistently at the peak enough for the Broncos last year.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And with Purcell, he does really fit that mold. Not necessarily the whole length part of it, but he is a quick player off the line of scrimmage. I did a film piece first thing earlier in training camp on Mike Purcell right before he was selected to land on the roster, and I believe it was the San Francisco game? I think is what it was. But anyways, just the ability to shoot the gap in the running game and to get off the line of scrimmage extremely quickly. And he does have the strength to be able to hold up against the double teams and stuff like that. But, as far as a pass rush aspect of it, Vic Fangio does like versatile guys that can play all three downs. And Mike Purcell is just not a guy that I don't think is capable of being that all-time, upper level of a interior pass rusher for this Broncos defense.
Yeah, flipping Booch. That's why I rely on my experts. I got to do it, brother.
Hey,
I got a lot of
Erick's a lot more versed in the draft than I am right now, but I'm getting my way worked up there, man.
Spinning a lot of plates, but hey, man, we're this is the honestly, guys, and this is the truth. The way I learn the most about the draft class isn't the way Erick does, for example, or even Lance, in terms of just spending hours and hours watching film, working contacts, talking to scouts, talking to coaches in college. The way I learn is I get sent articles as the editor-in-chief of milehighhuddle.com by guys like Erick, by guys like Lance, Nick, Carl. And as I'm copy editing these articles and getting them built in the system and I'm reading about these players, that's how I come to know each and every prospect. And we've started to scratch the surface on that heading into this draft season. So I'm looking forward to it even more. Now, here's one from Ben. He says, what do you think about Jamison Houston, the corner out of Baylor? He shut down some really good Big 12 receivers and won his share against Lamb. Lance, I'm not sure if you know much about Houston, but if not, Erick, your thoughts on what Ben has to say.
Go ahead, Erick.
Well, Ben, points to you. You found one guy that I have actually yet to watch. He's definitely on my list. I think I have him slated for next week, but I'm not 100% sure on that yet. But he's definitely coming. There's been a lot of praise for him, though, and I'm very excited to watch and see what he can do.
Guys, we got time for a few more. I know there's a bunch of questions we haven't landed on yet. We're going to try and get to them as many as possible here. Buana Beast wants to know, who should I look at during the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl tonight, which will be on NFL Network? Erick, you probably got a few guys already earmarked for that game.
I actually have a lot of guys. I mean, I have my own sheet that has everybody listed for it. There is one guy, running back Raymond Calais out of Louisiana Lafayette, that I'm going to be looking at pretty hard for him because I'm excited to see what he is. Omar Bayless, I mentioned him earlier in this. He's a guy that's going to be there. Let's see here. There's an offensive tackle, too. I'm trying to remember which one it is. Blake Brandel out of Oregon State. He's a guy that I'm actually very intrigued by. I really liked his pass sets when I first initially watched him. I do want to see more of him as a run defender, though, or a run blocker, though. Then getting to the defensive side of the ball, there is Malcolm Roach out of Texas, Kobe Smith out of South Carolina. He played with Javon Kinlaw, who is one of my favorites in the draft class this year. You've got linebackers in Jordan Feher, who's a really good guy, really good versatile guy. He's not as good in coverage as he is as his teammate Akeem Davis-Gaither, who's going to be at the Senior Bowl next week. You have Marcel Spears. I recently did a video on him, and his ability to play in coverage is something that's very intriguing. I want to see him be able to do more against the run. You've got Chris Barnes out of UCLA. He's another guy, athletic, has good range. You have defensive backs like Levante Taylor out of Florida State. He's a little bit lower on my board personally, just because I haven't really seen it much with him this last year, but I think that a move to safety in the NFL is really going to benefit him, and I'm going to be interested to see how he's used in the defense in the game tonight.
Guys, all signs point to Mike Shula coming to Denver. The deal hasn't gotten done yet. I think he was hoping to see if he was going to get the OC job in New York. That's, of course, been filled by Jason Garrett. Is there anything in either of your guys' minds that is going to stop Mike Shula from being Drew Lock's position coach in 2020?
No, not with me. I think just the relationship between Mike Shula and Pat Shurmur is just too good for him to pass up. I think that it's going to be any time now we're going to hear an announcement. I'm not going to say that I know anything any more than you guys do, but just with all the arrows pointing to Mike Shula coming into Denver, I think that's pretty well. You can pretty much put that one down in pen here directly. Yeah,
we ended up scheduling this podcast during the Shrine Bowl, but trust that these guys are keeping a big eye, Terry. And by the way, thank you very much for the super chat.
Thank you, Terry.
We appreciate it. Black Knight jumps in with another $5 donation. He says, are there any free agent or draft corners that might interest the Broncos? Let's start on the free agent side of things. Lance, who do you like as a possibility? Because the Broncos are going to have, right now they have about $63 million in cap space once they obligatorily, I don't know, I think I just created a word. Once they make the obligatory cut of Joe Flacco and decline the option on Ronald Leary, that's going to climb up into the low 80s. So they're going to have some money, whether they're re-signing Chris Harris or signing someone outside and re-signing Chris Harris. How do you see, or are there any names, Lance, you like free agent corners?
Well, the first one that pops up to me, just specifically right off the top of my head, would be Kendall Fuller. I think that he's going to be he's a great fit for Vic Fangio's defense. Really good in zone, good tackler. He's an aggressive kind of a player. He gets his hands on a lot of footballs. But a guy that he's not necessarily a free agent yet, but could be a potential cap casualty is Prince Amukamara out of Chicago. Played with Vic Fangio in Chicago a couple years ago, and is a perfect scheme fit, and would be a guy that could come in and be a veteran mentor for these young guys like Devontae Bosby, Isaac Yiadom, Devontae Harris, guys like that. Now, moving towards the draft side of things, obviously you've got Trevon Diggs, and you've got Christian Fulton out of LSU. Those are the guys probably going to be available for the Broncos at 15. But I know a guy that Eric is really high on. I'll let him get to that. Is Jeff Gladney out of TCU.
Ooh, do tell.
Jeff Gladney out of TCU, he's a tremendous fit in this game. He's definitely a guy that relies on playing off coverage, using his outstanding click and close to come up and make a play on the ball carrier or the receiver at the catch point, whatever. He gets his hands on a lot of balls. He has a lot of interceptions over his career at TCU. Tremendous athlete. Not the most physical guy, but he uses athleticism to make up for it. And but despite the lack of him being physical, he's does well when coming up and defending the run, and he may not always make the tackles himself, but he will at least slow down the running back for a safety to come in and make the play, which with safeties like Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons, that's not a problem because they can get up there just almost as quickly as Jeff Gladney will be able to. Other corners in the draft specifically, I mean, you've got Damon Arnett out of Ohio State. He's getting overlooked because of Jeffrey Okudah. And then Sean Wade, the redshirt sophomore who decided to return this year. They definitely took a lot more attention than Damon Arnett did, but he's just a good, reliable corner in the draft. There's looking at specifically for the Broncos, and especially later on, you've got Darnay Holmes, who's a great fit for him. You've got Stanford Samuels out of Florida State. He's another really good fit for him. You've got Bryce Hall, who, if there wasn't a tackling issue there, he'd definitely be up there. Then you've got Asong Bassi out of Wake Forest. He's another guy who has some tackling concerns that would be a tremendous fit for the scheme. Just got to fix those tackling issues with them because Vic Fangio values that so highly. Troy Pride Jr., he's a guy who's tremendous against the run, very physical coming up, very quick to come up, but the deeper downfield he gets, the more he struggles. This is an outstanding corner class. I mean, this is one of the best drafts in recent years, and it's carried drastically by the wide receiver, the offensive tackle, and the cornerback talent.
All right, let's grab another one here from Black Knight with the super chat. Appreciate you, bro. $5. He says, thoughts on Thaddeus Moss? And if he's available when the Broncos pick at 15, do we take him? Let's start with you on this one, Eric.
I absolutely love Thaddeus Moss. I'm so glad he declared. He immediately jumps up to being my number one tight end in this class. Tremendous athlete, pretty solid blocker. I mean, he's reliable there. Brings a little bit more to the table as a blocker than Noah Fant does. But if he's there at 15, I just don't see the Broncos doubling up on tight end year after year with Noah Fant and then Thaddeus Moss. I do like him a lot, as I've been saying, but just Noah Fant, he's going to be that tight end in Pat Shurmur's scheme that just doesn't value tight ends like the Rick Scangarello scheme did.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth with that one, Eric. We're going to see a lot more 11 personnel with Pat Shurmur. You know, the 3 wide receiver sets, getting 2 tight ends on the field like we saw with Rich Scangarello and offensive schemes of the past. That's not going to be an option for the Broncos at 15. I just don't see it happening.
Broncos Critic 13 on Periscope wants to know, are there any concerns that Shurmur's offense doesn't or won't, I suppose, involve Andy Janovich? Now, there was a really compelling conversation. I'm not sure if you guys got a chance to listen to the Building the Broncos podcast that came out this morning. Golly, the guy's name just escaped me, but
Arif Hassan.
Thank you. That covers the Vikings for the Athletic. So he was up close and personal for those 2 years Shurmur was in Minnesota. It was interesting what he had to say about the fullback position. Not necessarily that you just issue a guy like Janovich and cut him because you have no use for him, but especially because he was paid. You know, they'll find ways to use him, but not in the same way that traditionally you've seen Jano used as an ISO blocker and, you know, out of the I formation, running through the A gap, blasting linebackers.
Yeah, I don't think that his role is going to be huge on offense. I think they will definitely find ways to use him. But even if they weren't finding a way to use him, they're not going to get rid of him because people forget that he is a tremendous special teams player. And with how bad this Broncos special teams unit has been, they can use all the help they can get. Andy Janovich, again, he might not have the biggest role on offense, but they'll find ways to use him.
Yeah, and with Pat Shurmur historically over the course, and I mean, I might be speaking a little bit out of line here, but just I remember seeing a statistic, I think it was on Twitter the other day, just saying that how little that Pat Shurmur does use a fullback in the offense. It's something like 3% of the total plays that he's called. It's just, we're not going to see Janovich on offense. And as Eric said, with him being a tremendous four-phase special team player, meaning coverage units and return units, he's going to be a guy on the roster. We're not going to see Andy Janovich on the street anytime soon.
Oops, we grabbed that one. Jordan, he's one of our superstars on Super Chat. He's also the proud owner of a Blue Mile High Huddle hat because he was one of the randomly selected winners from Apple Podcasts. I want to say October. Anyway, he says, hey, guys, I watched Erick's video about the linebackers in the 2020 class. It seemed like they all had flaws, but could you name one that you and Lance like? Lance, I'm not sure if you saw that, so let's just start with Erick, and you can kind of list those five guys and the one in particular you think maybe is the one to eyeball the closest.
Well, let's see. I had Cameron Brown on there, who's more of a cover guy. I think that he's going to be a cover specialist, especially early on in his career in the NFL. There was Marcel Spears out of Iowa State, very versatile guy who can do a little bit of both, but he's definitely more of a cover guy. There was Kamal Martin, who's more of a run defender than pass coverage guy out of Minnesota. And then I'm trying to think of the other guys that I had.
I know it's been a minute.
It's been a little while since I did it, so I just can't remember who all I had. But those are guys that I definitely like. I mean, if Denver's looking for a guy who can just be a coverage guy, I mean, then Cameron Brown, he does it so well that he's definitely would be up there for just a later round cover option.
All right, let me see this last one here. We'll grab it from Ben Stewart, and then we got to wish you guys a good rest of your Saturday here. Ben says, I just don't see a first-round corner except Okada for us, especially after seeing Fulton struggle in the national championship game. What second-round corners would be worthwhile that would be a Fangio scheme fit? Lance, I'm not sure if you have any ideas, so I'll start with you on this, Erick, and then Lance, you add anything that comes to mind.
Well, I think with Christian Fulton, I think that he's still a great scheme fit. I think that, yes, he did struggle a little bit in the national game, but especially early on, but he kind of bounced back a little bit, and especially towards the end of the game, second half. But again, you have to factor in the fact that he was playing against two really good receivers that are part of the top of their class for this year and next year. You have the number one quarterback for next year, and Trevor Lawrence that he was facing against as well. So you have to factor that into it. Of course, there were some struggles to be expected. This is a guy who he played up against Alabama and handled Henry Ruggs very well for most of that game. I mean, there are some issues with him, but there are issues with every other corner in this class as well. And as for second round guys, I mean, that's either AJ Terrell. I mean, out of Clemson, he's a guy who struggled against LSU a little bit, but I was very low on him entering the season. But as the season went on, he just impressed me more and more. Jeff Gladney, he's another one. It's just such a good corner class that there's a lot of options for it. And with Vic Fangio, he does a good job of kind of adjusting his scheme a little bit, so they can be they don't have to find a guy who's a perfect scheme fit because he will find a way to make him work.
Lance, anything you want to add context-wise? Otherwise, we can grab what Steven's super chat here.
No, just that I agree with Erick that, the Jeff Gladney one is the one that really kind of intrigues me the most, but I do like AJ Terrell a lot as well out of Clemson. I think that he'd be a really good scheme fit as well.
Steve wants to know, guys, with the $2 super chat. Thanks, my brother. He says, when are the comp picks announced? I'll let you answer that, and let me just set the stage that from the last I read, the expectations are that the Broncos are probably going to get a 5th and 2 7ths. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, and your answer for Steven. Erick.
They are projected to get 3 compensatory picks. One of them is a 5th round, and 2 of them in the 7th round is the last I heard. They are for, I want to say, Shaq Barrett, and then one of them is for the cornerback who just got nothing but burned last year, and then for another linebacker, I believe, that left after this last season. And typically, comp picks are announced sometime after the NFL owner meetings. I think are typically end of February. I think is typically when they are.
Our friend from across the pond, JT, we can't get out of here without grabbing your question in 10 pound, or is that euro? I'm not sure. Forgive my ignorance. Thank you for the donation, though, JT. It means a ton to all of us. He says, hey, guys, glad I could make it. Just joined the room. Erick, did you cover the idea of panicking at 15 and using capital to trade back into the first. Your thoughts for JT, Erick?
Just so you know, he did actually correct that. It was supposed to say picking at 15. There's a message right after that said that. But yes, I have covered it a little bit, though not in an article. I did mention it a little bit in a video that I'm not a fan of trading back up into the first round pick. If I am going to sit there and be okay with the Broncos trading, I want them to maximize their 5 top 100 picks and potentially add a 6th round by packaging like a 4th and 5th round pick and getting back up into the top 100. But I'm just not for them moving up. I'm all for letting value fall to you. My biggest reason for that is that I'm very much a scattershot kind of mentality when it comes to the draft. The more picks you have, the more chances you have to hit.
Joseph jumps in quickly with a comment and a $2 super chat. Love you guys.
Hey,
Not
Joseph,
as much as we love you, Joseph.
All right.
So keep that in mind. And yes, Frolicious, I'll see you guys tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Mountain, 8 p.m. Eastern for Huddle Up with Zach. But guys, that's got to do it for today's live debut of the Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast. This is not necessarily the last time you're going to see me on this podcast, but these guys are taking the torch and they're moving forward with this pod, streaming themselves. You'll get to see a lot more and hear a lot more from Erick and Lance on Saturday. And we're going to try and keep it scheduled same day, same time throughout the off season on Saturdays so that you guys can get to know when that is and plan for it, look ahead to it and whatnot. By the way, Stu, one of our Super Chat superstars, comes in. Thanks for the great content. $10 donation, Stu. That means a ton. Thanks, brother.
It does. Thank you.
Guys, make sure you're following these guys. Sorry, Les, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Hey, Stu, I see you on the Huddle Up podcast all the time. I really appreciate what you're doing for those guys, and we appreciate you on here as well. Thank you very much, man.
Means the world to us. Guys, make sure you're following these fellas on Twitter, especially as we're getting into draft season. You got to make sure you're following these guys. Lance can be found, as you can see there, at Sanderson, MHH. Trickel, at Erick Trickel. Don't forget the CK there. Guys, have a great rest of your weekend. Enjoy what's left of the Shrine game. And this was fun, and I look forward to seeing these down the road.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate you. Thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, we're looking forward to keep doing this. So,
yep.
Awesome. Yep, that's right, Bonnaby. Saturday pods, middle of the afternoon, 3 p.m. Mountain, 5 p.m. Eastern-ish. So start planning on that moving forward. But for Lance, for Erick, I'm Chad Jensen. We will talk to you guys. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow and with Zach at the Huddle Up podcast.